Hi and welcome. This week we're going to be reassembling the water pump for my Gilera Saturno. First of all, I'd like to thank Nick for machining up the new shaft for the pump, and hopefully we won't have any problems with the reassembly. Let's get into it. I've laid all the parts out on the bench here so you can actually see what's involved in reassembling the pump. At the base we have the impeller. That's followed by the water pump seal. It sits between the impeller and the water pump body here. I'll put the part numbers for all these parts up as we go. I've cleaned up the pump body, so that's ready to go too. I've also got the 49 by 2.5mm O-ring that goes around the pump body and seals it. This is the new shaft, which I've had manufactured out of 316 stainless steel. And on top of that we have two bearings with a spacer in between. And holding those bearings in is a 28mm internal circlip. And on top of the entire assembly is the cam belt pulley, which drives the water pump. Now the bearing housing is a little bit loose, so I'm going to just apply a little bit of Loctite retaining compound. I'll just do the lower bearing area first. It doesn't need too much. I'm just going to use this cotton bud to apply just a little bit of it around, and then I'll drop that bearing in. Then we'll do the second bearing after I've got this one in. I've chilled the bearing so it should drop straight in. There we have the bottom bearing is in. So I'm just applying a little bit more Loctite to the area where the upper bearing will sit. Now I need to drop the spacer in, and now get the other bearing out. And now we can drop the second bearing in. Okay, now we have to put the circlip in. Careful you don't do your fingers in doing this. And there we have it. We've fitted the two bearings with a space in between and the circlip on top, so the next job is to fit the pump shaft through the back here. I will let the Loctite set for a while, then I will warm this up. It doesn't have to be too hot, and I've got the shaft, as I said, in the freezer, so I should be able to press the shaft in quite easily. Now before we press the shaft in, I'm just going to heat up this housing here, and I'm just going to use this hot air gun. I'm just going to blow hot air through the centre there so that we just really just need to heat up the centre of each ball bearing race. We don't want to heat it up too much, but because we could affect the Loctite and perhaps the seals as well. I've also made up this special tool to sit over the shaft while we put it into place. And there we have it, shaft in place. Our next task is to fit the cam belt pulley. Okay, I'm just going to heat up the pulley to make it easier to slip over the shaft when we press it on. Now I've got my special tool underneath to support the flange that's on this shaft, and now I've had this whole assembly in the freezer to chill it, and now we will just press it on. And there we have our assembled pump base. Now all that remains to be done is to fit the water pump seal and the impeller. Now the seal comes in two parts. There's the base, which has this ceramic ring in it, and there's the upper section, which has a spring on one end and the seal on the other end. And so this actually rotates against that base and forms a watertight seal. Now the base actually has a gasket around it, which you can see, and that sits down in a cavity in that water pump base there. Now I'm just going to put a little bit of detergent around the base there, just so I can slip this in quite easily. You've got to be careful what you use. You certainly don't want to contaminate the surfaces of these seals at all. They really should be dry and clean as you assemble the pump. If you do get them dirty, you can always use a little bit of methylated spirits or something like that to just clean it off and make sure that there's no contaminants on either part of the seal before you assemble it or after you've assembled it. And now I'll just fit the seal. Okay, so the next task is to actually fit the rotating seal, which sits against that face over the shaft. Now we've had to knurl the end of this shaft just a little bit because the impeller was a little bit loose on it. Now if you do need to do that, you should always emery all the high spots down so that you haven't got any sharp edges there that might actually damage the internal seal on this moving seal. I'll just put a little bit of detergent on the interior seal here just to allow it to slip over that shaft. And so that's both seals fitted, ready for the impeller to go on top. Now because it was a little bit loose, even though we've knurled it there, I'm going to put some Loctite retaining compound on it. It doesn't need that much, so I'm just going to put a smear of that in here. Doesn't have to be a huge amount. Just to allow it to bond properly. Just wipe any of the excess off, and now we're sort of ready to go. Now we do have to allow some clearance on these veins here, so we'll push it down and just check where it's sitting. Now we'll just check the clearance. It should be just over 1/2 mil, which it is. Check all the way around, and then we are done. There you have it, one completely rebuilt water pump. In part 3 of this series, we'll be refitting the pump to the motorcycle and refitting the cam belt, refilling the coolant, and getting the bike back on the road. I'll catch you next time.